Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to call to order the May 5th, 2025 Lake Washington School Board Study Session. Let the record reflect that all school board members are present, and we have two of our student reps with us, Shira and Ella. We have one agenda item on the plan today for our study session, and that is continuation of putting together our annual work plan for the 25-26 school year. Since the last time we had our discussion on the annual work plan, we had sent out a survey to all the board members to submit, answer a few questions, study session topics that they would be interested in for next year, board meeting program update topics, stakeholder groups and linkage and engagement areas, any other topics or areas of interest, and then pending our discussion on redoing how we monitor our results policies next year, which indicators or areas within our results we would want to prioritize or focus on for progress monitoring were the questions. If you look at board docs, there is a draft of things that will need to be on the work plan for next year. So things that we know will be necessary. And Director Guthrie and I sat with Dr. Holman and we kind of did a preliminary glance at the work plan and inputted everything that we could kind of think of that would be necessary. And then you'll see there are open slots then to be filled based off of some of the feedback that we got. So if you look, if you're able to pull it up, you'll see that there actually aren't that many slots available in the work plan with all of the necessary items that we have already. I will say we also did look through everyone's submissions and pull out a couple of interesting ones that we thought that there was more than there was a majority interest in already. But none of these are kind of final. So I have a couple of suggestions for how we do this. One, we could have our discussion first on what we would like the progress monitoring for results policies to look like for next year first. Because I believe that there's still some questions and debate and discussion that we need to have around that. And then look at people's submissions and try and finalize what the remaining topics will be for the open study sessions on the work plan, or we can do vice versa. Does anybody have a preference? Nobody has a preference. Okay, so we have printouts of everybody's submissions. People's names have been kind of taken off. It's interesting, I will say, it's interesting to see the variability in what people submitted. I only have 5 copies, so let's see. I have a virtual copy, so I can give mine to our students to share. Oh, okay. Then we can do that. So let's do 3 that way. 2 this way. And if everyone wants to take 5-10 minutes and read through kind of what was submitted, and then we can have a discussion. Sound good? Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how we land on what the open study session topics are going to be because everyone's responses were very different. S- So I don't actually know how to have this discussion, so feel free to chime in. But in general, if you read through just like the study session topic proposals, there's quite a range of interests and topics. Looking at our work plan, the draft, we've got a half session available in August that's open, and then February a full study session, in March a full study session, and then the following August. So really it's 2.5 study session topics worth that we kind of have space to fill in with an additional interest. Does anybody want to advocate for one or the other?
Sorry. What is the order of operations? I think we're going to talk about progress monitoring first, or are we going to do?
Nobody had a preference, so we're starting with study session topics.
Okay, great. I have questions on the topics. Can we start with that? I have to look off my phone because my computer's restarting. There was a study. I don't have it in front of me because it's not loading. But there was a study session topic early on facilities and technology. I think it referenced the 2 OEs. What is the intended scope of that study session topic? Because I appreciate that there's some. Let me just back up, high level. Yes, there's some openings. There's also some things that I may have an interest in excising from the work plan. If there's, do the words I say make sense as a starting point?
Yes.
Thanks, Barbara.
So the reason there's OEs in study sessions is because at our last discussion, we talked about moving essentially what was the equivalent of the program update that we normally have at board meetings for monitoring to the study session, and then we would then approve the monitoring report at the board meeting that immediately followed the study session.
So these would be like the technology services
And
program update,
facilities
that we
update.
have had annually. Okay. An idea, in the spirit of opening up more room, is there a way to provide those updates not in a board meeting? Whether it be a written submission to the board. I know that historically we've had those in the business meeting. They're interesting. The information we receive is interesting, and I think helpful as a board member. So I'm not saying that it's not information I wouldn't want to receive. I'm just thinking, like, if we have this limited, we have limited real estate for study sessions, and so it does seem to me, particularly for those, that the updates that have been provided as a presentation could be provided in a written form, and I as a board member would be perfectly fine with that and be able to process that information the same way as if somebody was saying it aloud to me.
So at the last study session, one of the options was to have probably 2/3 of the OEs on consent agenda.
Yeah.
And the board indicated that that wouldn't be an acceptable method because there was a concern that if the board is approving the OEs on consent agenda consistently, it doesn't give voice for the board to really kind of hear about, have conversation, and monitor as effectively as if there's a presentation opportunity for the board. And so these aren't program presentations. These are OE monitoring presentations.
Okay.
And then if you have the work plan pulled up, so like October 6th is OE 12 and OE 13. You'll see that evening during the board meeting, there's OE 12 action, OE 13 action. So it won't be a redo of the OE presentation. It will be the board conducting the formal action on it, meaning there's, opportunity for discussion, opportunity for input, so then the board member that's writing up the summary actually has information to put into the summary. So it allows for the change cycle of policy as well. So we redid the whole kind of thinking around where OEs land based on the board's input, specifically into study sessions, which, as you can see, that plays a big part of the board's, particularly in the fall, but plays a big role of study sessions.
Can I keep talking? It's possible I'm taking a different position than I did even several meetings ago. But that's fine. We've also, like, I guess I just want more clarity on this, because we have, usually when we've monitored facilities and technologies, there's been essentially two presentations. There's been a program update presentation on both of those programs. And then there's been, we go through the monitoring of it. And those are, those are different. Like, those are not, there's some overlap, but they are different presentations, and there's different information that's being provided to the board. I'd have to go back and look at the meetings, but my memory of the length of the presentations for the monitoring of OE12 and OE13 is it's much more concise than the program update that we've received. Like maybe 10% as long. And so, okay, I'm fine with that presentation be during a study session. It doesn't strike me that that would take up that, and I guess maybe that's why we also have Levy on there. See the next bullet point now. Is that, so that is, but that is the scope. It will be a monitoring, it will be a presentation of the monitoring report for OE12 and OE13.
Yeah, I see it as a presentation, some level of discussion, and then the board takes the formalized discussion and any action items into the board meeting, where you formalize input, changes, those kinds of things.
Okay. Again, recognizing that I may have said something different 2 weeks ago, why are we doing that in the study session versus the board meeting? Can somebody refresh my recollection as to the...
The intent of moving the kind of the information and some of the discussion to study session was to free up time in our board meeting to do progress monitoring. So you'll see on October 6th, there's R2 progress monitoring report, as well as OE12 action and OE13 action. Lindsay.
I almost wonder before getting into this conversation if it's worth it to talk about the purpose of the study session, because I feel like it's now changing a little bit from what it has been to now we're taking pieces from what's been in the board meeting, this monitoring piece, and putting it in here. And I think sorry, this is really echoey. I think the conversation might be better if we are all in agreement, or at least have a discussion of what we all think study sessions should be, because I think we might be all coming at this with different thoughts about it, and we might be in different places. I don't know. That's my thought. I was just curious to know how everyone sort of defines what, in their mind, what a study session is and what the purpose of it is. We don't have to, but that would be.
Would you like to start?
All right, fine. I mean, I think like the study session is like the working meetings of the board where I think where we get the most value is when we dig into policy and we spend the time breaking things apart and having discussions like this, for example, like sort of messier, freer flowing conversations around our work and planning and thinking together, and pretending that there aren't cameras on us recording everything. Like, to me, that's the value. And I appreciate what Dr. Yoakum said, because like when I think about like when we shifting, like it does feel like we're just moving this. It doesn't really, if we were to actually like be consistent with how we think about like what is the study session versus the business meeting of the board, I mean, moving something to the study session just to free up room, it does feel like we're sort of blending those things. And having those conversations, and again, I apologize. I'm sure I said the exact opposite thing 2 weeks ago, but like having, and I'm glad I'm glad I've had the chance to revisit this again. Having those conversations around monitoring in the formal meeting, I think does mean something a little bit different. So I know that we have a lot like on our agenda for these formal meetings by trying to add these progress monitoring, but I'm wondering, like, maybe a solve is we just start the board meeting at 5 p.m. on those days, and we just have a longer business meeting with breaks, of course. And I don't, yeah, okay.
Are you done?
Well, for now, I can be.
Mark?
To an extent, I agree with Director Lillibrady. The line has blurred a lot between study session and business session, if you will, or meeting. And I think that's the result. I mean, the old intent with the study session, there was a free exchange of ideas with no cameras. And I think people are a lot more freer with their discussions on it. And since it's broadcast anyway, maybe we just restructure it where it's a board meeting period, and then whatever it would have been on the study session is the first items on the board meeting. It seems like we're having two board meetings, to be quite frank, since they're both being broadcast. And I don't think we're any more forthcoming in the study session than we are in a board meeting, to be quite frank.
Lindsay, would you like to share?
Well, I know my opinion, and I clearly have it written in here as well for everyone else to read. And yes, being the newest one here and thinking about this and just thinking of the words board meeting and study session, I think I have viewed study sessions as opportunities for learning. And it is expected in our GCs that we come prepared to meetings, right? That we come having done this work ahead of time. So when I think about like OE12 and OE13, I think it is expected that we come having read through this monitoring report and ready to have a discussion. And sometimes the presentations are highlights of what is in that monitoring report. But I think that if we have read it, we should be prepared. So what do I think study sessions are? I don't think it's that, actually. I think it is an opportunity for, in a more relaxed environment, for us to kind of come together as a team. And I say that as like staff and district and students, to be able to kind of dig into the topics that are of importance to us, whether it's policy that we're working on or connected to that, obviously. But an opportunity for all of us to be learning rather than, I guess, being taught. Like, yes, there will be times where you will need to teach us, but how can this open up to all of us learning together, whether it's from experts from outside, whether it's bringing in students, whether it's bringing in families to talk about specific things. I'm trying to go back to like, I clearly split them into different categories of what we could do, but I think that's how I view study sessions, as an opportunity for everyone to be learning rather than be talked to about something that we could learn on our own. That's kind of how I view it.
Lisa.
Yeah, I agree about learning being an important piece of that, and also just more discussion. Yes, more free-form discussion, which, and those two are not unrelated. I think I have more of an opportunity to learn from the other four of you in this format specifically, and sort of hash things out together than in a board meeting typically. I do agree that the lines tend to blur. It was really hard on the form having like, what do you want as study section topics and what do you want as board meeting topics? And I was like, I don't know. Like I've just got a bunch of things that I want to know about. And some were maybe clearer than others in terms of where they should go. But a lot of it's like, yeah, that they could really go in either place. I'm rambling and I don't know if I'm answering the question. I do think there's something different about being in this room versus that room. Like the physical location is different. So I wouldn't just want to be in the boardroom all night. I also, just kind of thinking through like, yes, what if we did just have one big meeting that starts at 5:00? Also, it's very convenient from a public comment perspective, and from the public knowing when to show up in order to engage with the board. And it's very easy to hold to that because of the structure of, we know that we're going to stop in here by 7:00. We're going to move over there. We're going to do a few things, and then we're going to do public comment. Versus if we just had one big long meeting, I'd want to be really thoughtful and respectful of the public and making sure that they can continue to engage with us in that format, and not have to sit through, potentially like our first 3 agenda items, or come at 5:00, which can be hard for people coming off work. So I'll stop now.
Okay, couple things. So you asked kind of what our individual interpretations of what study sessions are. So for me, there are opportunities to just dive into topics that we have interest in, but not necessarily something that we are taking action on. I think it's a learning opportunity for the board, but also for the community. Although I appreciate that the expectation is for board members to come prepared to discuss items. Just depending on time and people's schedules and what they define as preparation. I do think that there is a baseline of just like making sure we're all on the same page before we get into a discussion that needs to take place, which is where I appreciate the presentations from staff summarizing kind of what the information we have received is. I also think that that's beneficial for a community who are listening in to learn about a discussion that we're having. They need the background information to follow the conversation and the discussion, and I think it's unrealistic to expect them to read through everything that we've read through in order to keep up with any discussion that we might be having. Because I know I have directed community members to study sessions and said, you should listen to this when you have questions about that. And a lot of it is information that staff is presenting that is valuable. So I don't know if that answers your question of how I interpret study sessions. The reason we went down this path was I think that there was an interest in focusing on results versus operations. And although we need to monitor the OEs, the goal of this whole process was to try to free up board meeting time to focus on the things that matter the most, which are our results. I appreciate that it feels like there's a blurring of kind of what goes in a study session versus a board meeting, but ultimately there's limited time and competing interests of wanting to maintain some level of ability to discuss and monitor OEs, but then also increase our time and attention on results. And I am happy to hear of other suggestions around how to achieve that, but this seems to be at least a good trial, in my opinion, for next year. to see how we can get to a point where we are focusing more on the things that we have said as a board that we wanted to. And I appreciate that that's going to come with maybe some flexibility on how we do our OE monitoring. But yeah, I think that's where I'm at. Yes.
I have a few more questions. I assume this is the case, but where November 3, OE 567, similar idea, right? The board would receive some level of presentation on the monitoring of those policies, not the programmatic components that underlie them. And then we would have a discussion around it. Okay, and then, just so I'm clear again, we're on November 17, OE4, same story. Okay. And then at the meeting, when it came up for board action, we would not get that the board would not receive that presentation a second time. Okay, good. I have all of you on camera. I'm just making sure. And then
maybe just to be clear then, like just to put a finer point on that, the way I'm picturing this, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that yes, we would get the monitoring presentation in the study session. We'd also ask questions, and so we'd move right to motion and discussion.
on the dais.
On the dais,
Thank you. That was
exactly.
gonna be my next.
Oh, wait, sorry to interrupt.
That's okay. You said it in fewer words, probably. Okay. And there'd be some recognition on the dais that the board has discussed this during the study session, so we don't just look like potted plants during that part, right? Okay. That seems fine with me as a process. Thank you. Can I ask another question? School safety and security update on September 15. That's not on policy work, I'm guessing. I'm assuming that's an update on our. We haven't had that. There's thankfully good reasons why we haven't had that level of update in a while. But it's just like on our overall school safety approach. Is that right? Our layered safety approach.
Correct. And
Okay.
I don't think the board has had opportunity to engage around our community connectors,
Yeah.
community engagement, ongoing committee, stakeholder engagement. And so it'll be both school layered safety, but also community connectors and the work that's ongoing.
And I would just put in too, and I'm assuming too, we'll have opportunities to shape some of this or to give some more feedback on, what exactly our interests are there, as we typically do. But yeah, I do see a lot of connections with community connectors to OE10
Yeah.
specifically. And so, yes to all of that. And it's been a while. And I think it's a good thing to talk about as we move into the revised OE10 and start working on monitoring that. And there's linkages around that too later in the year.
Great. I really like that. I always think these things are the highest. They're the most helpful when there is a direct connection to policy and like ongoing policy work. And so if we could, okay, as part of the scope of that, I'd like to see that. I've been talking. I'll pause.
I think this is it's hard for me to wrap my head around because I think, and I don't want to say thematically, but I guess I could say thematically, where like I'm looking at, like I look at November 17th, and then we have OE4, and then chronic absenteeism, and then OE10, and then action on OE4. And it's like, I don't see the connection. And I feel like now what I appreciate, at least with like the program updates, is there's connection to at least what we're monitoring or what we're discussing. And like I look at our linkage on December 15th and why could that not be our our study session as we move into like that board meeting of OE10 monitoring? Like how can we look at this, and maybe it's a quick OE4 or it's change, I don't know, but how can we, and especially if we're trying to get community more invested in watching our meetings or attending and trying to get maybe more engagement, if we're like, well, if you want to talk about OE4 or absenteeism or OE10, then this is the meeting to come to, because there's a lot going on right there. But how do you kind of look at this and focus so it makes sense? It all kind of pieces together. And I feel like that piecing together is what I'm missing. It's more of like, let's just plug it in because we have a spot here. That's kind of where unless I can't see how it all fits together.
So I'll attempt to make some connections. So on the November 7th meeting, the board is taking action that evening on OE4. And so the OE4 presentation happens during the study session. But there was a few different comments from board members related to chronic absenteeism, which directly relates to OE10. But OE10 is monitored during the board meeting, so a formal presentation will actually be at the board meeting. But the thinking was to explore chronic absenteeism much deeper on the night that we're talking about OE10. And so that was the connection that we were thinking about there. The rules related to absenteeism, I'll say, levers that schools have related to student absences are much different than when any of us attended school. And so it's become a unique challenge that our schools are facing. And so for us, it related in that regard, both board meeting OE4 plus chronic absenteeism. And then when we're thinking about OE10 development of the policy, at the February 9 study session, that's where we're bringing OE10 back for review by the board. And we wanted to have linkages prior to that so that as we're updating OE10 and revising it, that we actually have the feedback from community related to that. So maybe not perfect, but that was some of the thinking around it.
So was there thank you. And was there thinking around that with all the other meetings? I'm trying to connect like 5th Comprehensive High School to OE14.
So some of the study sessions are holdovers from this year. And so one of the things the board said was, and this was at the extended study session, that after the October enrollment, that the board, October 1 enrollment, that we actually come back and have the conversation related to the 5th Comprehensive High School. So I would say there's multiple inputs into putting this together. You'll see boundary throughout this. That's also a very disconnected topic, if you will, but it's essential that the board spends time discussing, learning, understanding. Should we conduct a boundary review next year? Also levy. I almost feel like we don't have enough time set aside for levy, but it's really important that the board is clear on all elements related to the February 2026 levies that will be on the ballot. And so the board has some decisions to make. And so that's why those are preloaded there and starting in August. And we actually think we may need to start sooner.
Building on one thing that Director Yoakum did say, though, I would love to figure out a way to have more community voice in some of these presentations. I don't know if there may be times, and I think OE10 is a good example for next year, where we do need to have some dedicated linkage time, but especially taking advantage of this more informal environment that we've all talked about. I don't know if there's the opportunity for some of these things. I don't know exactly what that would look like or what I'm asking for, but an opportunity to potentially hear from community members. And it might not be, from a work plan perspective, it might not look any different. But just thinking about how we might structure that topic. So like 5th Comprehensive might be a good example where maybe that study session becomes some sort of presentation, yes, and discussion among the board, but also an opportunity to bring in community members, especially because it's something that we've discussed a lot, but mostly off-site and off-camera, and starting to get a little bit of community input, because I think as we've talked about, it's something that community engagement needs to be involved in that evaluation and decision really from the start, because it's going to have a really, whatever we decide to move forward with will have a really large impact on the whole community. So that might just be something to think about, how we can, a different way to leverage study sessions, or a different, I haven't seen that yet from our study sessions, but there's no reason.
Are you
Why couldn't-
envisioning that kind of like a town hall, perhaps, but with invites? I don't know.
Yeah, possibly. And it could
Staff-
look different for different topics,
Yeah.
but I could imagine, like Director Yocum said, that maybe it's thinking about, hey, the formal presentation, let's limit that to an hour, and then we have some sort of invitation of, I don't know how that would look like, literally, like, do we just give everybody a mic? And that could go a little sideways, but just a little. But for other topics, it might be, very similar to the program update that we had before OE14 last year, which was really powerful for me. One of the most powerful program updates I think we've ever had, or that I've ever had as a board member, where some families came in who had benefited from different programs that the Equity and Family Engagement Department was providing. And I almost felt bad that they were, in this like really formal meeting and that they're like at the podium and have to speak to us. And it feels like something like that would be much more natural in an environment like this, to just bring in more community voice and ideally in a way that's maybe a little bit less formal, and less sort of talk to these people up on high.
I have some more questions. On May 18th, there's a K-12 Arts and Education study session. Is that, what are we planning to do during that meeting? Tell me what your plan is for a meeting a month and 13 days from now.
So as we
Or a year and 30 days from now.
as we
Thank you.
go through a number of organizational changes related to the arts, it'll be important for us to report back to the board, whom provided feedback in their surveys, that the arts is very important to the board. And so bringing back some data related to those changes, successes, challenges we're facing, also in our specifically in our high school day, how are we seeing that play out? Because by that point, we'll have a second year of registration into a 6-period day. So we'll start to see what does the outlook of just raw registration numbers, like how is that playing into our arts program? Because part of the board's expectation is a robust arts education for students as well. So your colleagues would be able to answer what, as they put arts in education on their survey, what they were hoping for.
I feel like I was just called a unpatron of the arts there.
No, I don't believe that's what you were saying. You were just curious as to what you would expect. And I know your colleagues also, I mean, I'm
Yeah,
not
okay.
being cheeky. Like, honestly, there were comments made that this is something that the board would like to have updates on.
Yeah, I guess, and so my question to my colleagues for that study session is to what end? Like, we're not at that study session, following that study session, if we don't like what we hear about the programmatic update, we're not going to tell Dr. Holman, you know what, change the elementary music program model again. We're not going to, I mean, that's not, well, we should not be doing that. Let me put it that way. The board could do that if it chose. The board should not be doing that. I haven't heard, I'm not aware of, I mean, is there going to be a policy connection to this? Are we going to be looking at our existing policies in OE11 to see if there's revisions needed for arts and education? Are we just receiving a program update and then providing our feedback on the program? I just, I mean, if you saw mine is the first one in this packet. I have concerns about having too many study sessions where we focus on operations without and I'll stop talking just because I see Director Choi wanting to cut me off. Without a goal in mind, a goal related to board work, because otherwise we're just either receiving information or perhaps even worse, we're doing the wrong thing with that information. So what are we doing?
I will respond as one of the board directors who said I would like a study session on arts and education. I have an interest in digging into whether or not there is a minimum level of arts opportunities that need to be preserved in specifically our secondary schools, regardless of registration or enrollment. And if that is the case, that is a policy issue, potentially, something that we would put in somewhere. It's a budgetary consideration. There is always the argument that is made every time there are cuts, the arts go first. For various reasons, that there is some truth to that, and sometimes there isn't. But the minute you see a disruption in the availability of a choir class or an orchestra class, it has very long impacts past the 1 year that it might have been missing. And I think COVID really showed how it could impact education. And so that's my interest in having arts and education as a topic for a study session next year. Lisa.
Yes, I was one of the others who said that. Yeah, and it very similar to what Director Choi said. I'm just trying to wrap my brain around what is happening with those programs. Like it was a surprise I just heard, and this is through the community. I think it's Kamiakin that does not have a choir program, and that's like unusual across our middle schools. The fact that I believe Redmond L never got an elementary band program staffed this year. And I pick out those two examples. There's some equity connections there with Redmond L being one of our Title I schools, and we know Kamiakin being one of the schools that, while not designated Title I, does have a higher percentage of students receiving free and reduced lunch. So understanding, yes, if there are some of these gaps in the system, how that impacts, how that flows through, for example, Kamiakin, how that flows through to Juanita, and then what's the experience at Juanita High School. I just, and also I think what I've started to understand sort of through piecing together different conversations is that oftentimes, like there's no offense, Dr. Rose, but we have many English teachers throughout the system. And so if we lose an English teacher at one school, that's hard, and it doesn't mean that we stop doing English. But music and arts seem to be different, where we might just have one person at a school who's really interested in, I don't know, jazz band, and the impact of losing that particular teacher, regardless of no judgment being passed on that, but just trying to understand some of what's getting in the way and how that might potentially, especially inform the budget, or are there places where we need to prop up a particular program just to kind of get it going so that it can sustain itself. That's my interest. And this is really just, for me, it's a lot of learning and just sort of understanding and trying to piece together a lot of little things that I've heard both in the community and in board meetings over the years.
Okay, I'm not. Yes, all of that. But like the decision to overstaff, for example, the decision to whether it makes sense operationally to overstaff music programs to ensure their long-term viability, like that is not a board decision. And so like receiving that information and understanding it better, yes, interesting. Yes, could be even interesting for the community to hear it, but we're not going to be making a decision on that. Where we could make a something the board could use as leverage is we could think about what indicators we have for like OE 11.5, for example, which is assure that the instructional program includes opportunities for students to develop talents and interests in their specialized areas of interest. Like looking at that, looking at how we're monitoring that, reflecting on that, maybe changing how that's monitored to ensure that information is elevated in the system and drives the system. Like that is where we can have like change. And if the, if this May 18, 2026 presentation is like tied to that, like to me, that's like much higher leverage board, that's within our lane, that's higher leverage board work, and that actually could result in something that the board does that would have a meaningful effect on the district.
Before you go, Director Stewart, can I respond?
I'm going to take that.
Oh, okay. I will say that there is also the potential for new policy to stem from this discussion, and I think that that is potentially of interest in terms of arts, education, and if there is concern around it being like board work. Like I agree, we would not go into a program update on the arts and say add X number of teachers to X schools and X programs. Like that's not the goal, but understanding the cost, the benefit, the goal of doing something like this, and then having obviously related to our board policy. And if it doesn't fit, if we deem that like there needs to be something within OE 11 or somewhere else, OE 14, around consistency in arts across our schools, like that, I would say that that is well worth board study session time. Anyone else on this topic, or are we moving on?
I guess I'm still not clear. Well, maybe I am clear. Maybe I just don't like the answer. But I'm going to frame it as I'm not clear on what it is that we're doing on May in a year from now.
Well, I think we have some time to figure that out.
Well, but we're like a lot. So, some of us may not be. I do think like it's important to like have these conversations now and like set the expectations now, because a bullet point, it will stay there once it's in writing. Like we'll smash cut to a year from now, we'll be having a program update and we'll be yelling at Dr. Holman about like what why don't you have a choir program at Kamiakin, Dr. Holman? But it's like a potential, like there is a future where the board is having that conversation. That's why I think it's really important to have that conversation now and have expectations and then memorialize those in writing. So, I mean, I guess I'll phrase this as an ask, like, can we have like in these sort of, and I have another one I'm going to ask a question about in a minute. Like, can we have a direct connection to like OE 11 policy, like in that bullet point?
Again, I'm going to cut you off because when we do our actual annual work plan, this is like penciled draft.
Mm-hmm.
But every time, if you look back at our previous work plan, there is always the policy reference for every topic. There is always a more detailed description of kind of what will be covered. And I know that changes as the year goes, but that will be the goal with this one, like as well. The plan is to create that work plan off of this draft. So yes, there will be policy connections and more details on each of these.
Can I say one more thing?
You have to ask Mark because he's been waiting patiently for his turn.
Bless you.
And that,
I didn't mean just a connection, saying like that, and this connects to OE11. I meant like I want the I would like I want sound like my child. I would like the connect, like not just a connection, but like we are reviewing OE11 with a lens, or reviewing our policy to OE11 with a lens of the arts. Like we're going to see if OE11 or our policies scheme as a whole, but I think it really is just OE11. I look at it, that whether OE11 meets the board's interests for the arts, like, And if that is the scope of the study session, then I'm happy. If it's not, I'm sad.
I'm going to agree with Eric. And and yeah, I would rather see it say OE 11 or 14, whichever one, and there's a discussion there, and whether we just leave it at that, and then we get to May and we're like, oh wait, there's something else, or these are the few things with that. But I also wonder, okay, now I'm stepping into Mark here, that like I went through and looked at what all the study session topics are, and the OEs that we have listed are OE 9 and OE 10, and it's like I wonder if we're going to spend time on these open, where everywhere it's highlighted that says open, do we take a lens and a focus, or are we just kind of picking and choosing things that are of interest, or do we say no, we're really going to dive into a lot of different topics around OE 10, or we're going to dive into a lot of topics around OE 9 or OE 3 or OE 14. But like, is it the topic of music that we care about, or yes, we care about that. That's not what I meant. That is the focus of that meeting, or is it a broader policy that we want to look at? And if that's the case, is that the policy that we really want to dive into next year? Yes, there could be an interest in knowing more about arts, but is it worth it to define what it is that as a board we really want to dive deeper into in our available time?
I think you finally get to talk.
I've just been scrolling back and forth to make sure I'm not missing something for whatever reason. I have no problem with the arts discussion and the idea of playing it into policy, because I hate seeing one school getting robbed of a program, and I think of the students who are in that talent area, if you will, not having a chance for scholarships, really, by virtue of us not having a choir class or us not having a band class. And I think that's a real possibility with a lot of students at the high school level. And one aside, though, as long as we don't have to sing the presentation, that's all that, But as I scroll back and forth through here, I'm not seeing any update in the study sessions on how our inclusion is working or not working. I see an update for OE 14, but that covers a broad swath of areas, and I don't want to see it get lost, to be quite frank. And it bothers me that we feel like we fixed it and now we can move on, because I don't think it's that fixed. And that bothers me to see that kind of fall to the wayside. I'm not saying it should be in the place of the arts at all. I'm also really disappointed not to see, and it could be in various forms. We talked about being able to discern, let's see, what was it? I'm sorry, all of a sudden I'm blanking on the term, but critical thinking, and the idea of students being able to have if we had an update as to what we are doing to ensure students are getting an exposure to critical thinking of what they're looking at on the internet, or what they're looking at actually even the written word, if you will, and being able to discern fact from fiction, wheat from chaff, whatever. And because I think it's a very it goes to the ability for those students to, one, after they get out of school, discern it, but also it gives an opportunity for those students at that time to exercise an ability to hold polite's the wrong word probably, but civil discussions on topics that they may not agree on. because as you look at those topics and try and discern what's truth, what's fiction, that's going to stimulate some discussion, and we don't have it. Now, maybe that's just me, because I'm more of a policy wonk, but anyway, my primary concern is the lack of the special ed inclusion.
I was just thinking of like breadth versus depth. And I feel like we are kind of spread out over lots of things without potentially having this conversation of what are like the main things, that depth that we want to go into. And is it, I guess, I don't know what people think. Are study sessions more of a little bit of everything, or going deeper into something that we're really working on, like a few deep things that we're working on over the year? So I don't know, I was just thinking of that as that was brought up. I don't know what you guys feel, study sessions, if it's better to have a little bit of all, or?
For me, I don't think there's a better or a worse. It depends. If there is a topic that the majority of our board wants to go deep into and wants to spend significant amount of time exploring, and we come to that consensus, then I'm fine devoting more study sessions to a single topic. But I think, at least for me, when I see the survey responses, there is a wide range of topics that are interesting to our board, and not a lot of similarities in like a specific area. So for me, it's hard to say, let's pick this one, because we all have such different responses, which is the point of this meeting, is to try to figure out what else would we like to add to our available slots. So would somebody like to make a proposal to try and move this conversation along? Eric?
I have more questions. In January and in May, there are bullet points for high school day update. What is the intention for that, and then what will the board do with that? Do we get another chance to? Do we get our chance to beat up on Scott? Is that what's going to happen?
Well, fortunately, to date, the board has not beat up on Scott. So I appreciate that, because you can't beat up Scott, you can beat me up. How I view an update like that, my team and I were in the midst of, I would say, a massive organizational change that has implications across the board's policies and the board's adoption of a budget, and providing the board with feedback from, I think, do we have it 2 times?
Yes.
In here? There's value in hearing how it's being framed, in terms of if we just look at the board's policies, it's almost every policy is touched by high school day. And so to me, it's of value for the board to, if you will, soft monitor that almost as a proxy for large organizational change. We don't go through those types of shifts very often. And so I think the board does have a responsibility to ensure some level of fidelity and compliance.
And communication. I think it's important to our community to know that the board is aware of big systemic changes and what's going on. I think there is value in dedicating time to listening to feedback and progress on topics like that. That's my opinion. Mark?
Given the Sturm and Drang we went through with going from 7 to 6, and the height of emotion that came out from parents and students, I don't see it as being a bad idea to have it discussed twice, to be quite frank. It may be more than that, I don't know. But, if it's going well and all of a sudden the kinks have worked out, It does have an impact on the arts education. It does have an impact on other programs. And if we actually put that into context of programs, I can see it being very helpful to have it at Elwood.
I have follow-up questions. Is the idea that the board will receive updates on the implementation of the changes to the high school day experience? Is that what honestly, I'm trying to understand what the intent of this is and why it's in a study session and not in a board meeting. Like, we as a board are not going to be doing work on the high school day. Yes, I agree. There's value in the board receiving update on that and having that occur in a public setting. And it's important that the board be aware of the implementation and understand how it's going. And but when I see something in a study session, to me I think, okay, are we doing work on that? And I don't think that we are. We're not going to do any policy work around that. So why not just have it during the board meeting?
I think that's a fair criticism.
Oh, I didn't mean as a criticism. Okay, well, sorry.
I would disagree. I mean, you could make the same argument, like, why do we have boundary process update then in study sessions and not board meetings then? Or why do we have budget updates in, like, because we are fortunate to be able to record and broadcast our study sessions, I think that it makes sense to be able to cover some of these topics in study session and not just board meetings, especially when there's no action being taken. So we're not taking action on the high school day, which is why it's not in the board meeting, which is the only place that we can actually take action. Yes, Shira.
Can I don't know if I've been confused, but can you clarify the difference between a board meeting and a study session?
Spelling.
Yeah, a board meeting is the only place the board can take official action. And so in a study session, there is no decisions that the board can make. And so any topics that are on the agenda at a study session are for learning, discussion of the board. And so that's the main distinction.
Do you think there are any underlying distinctions? So that's on paper, that's the difference. But when it comes to other things, I don't know, the tone of the meeting or audience or anything like that, what are the differences and what do people want to hear and hear?
We always characterize the board meeting as the business meeting of the board. It's a more formal setting, as you know, on the dais. It is where we follow Robert's rules. It is where we conduct actions, anything that we are approving or, taking a vote on. Study sessions are more informal. These are working meetings. These are opportunities for us to dialogue and discuss because of OPMA. We cannot, as a full board, meet at any other time to have any discussion, the five of us. And so this is really the only other opportunity where we can engage in discussion on any topic that's related to board work. Does that answer your question? Okay. Mark?
I can see the point of the idea that perhaps it belongs more in the business meeting, to be quite frank, because it is an update. We aren't acting, although we have potential within it. To me, the line is blurred so much. If we move it to the board meeting, and perhaps we move other topics to the board meeting, and it frees up more the wide breadth of topics that everyone wanted for study sessions. It seems like we're trying to compartmentalize some things that we think are going to be massively discussed, so we don't have to spend a lot of time in the board meeting. It looks like we're trying to meet a schedule.
I agree. I'll say it again. Eric, cheer. No, I'm kidding. I think all of this comes back to a non-defined purpose of the study session, right? I don't, is the purpose, working meetings, opportunity to dialogue, and what do we need to, what am I trying to say? We all have different purposes. Sorry, that's kind of what we talked about at the beginning, kind of our different opinions on that. But I do agree with Eric, Director Lilleberty, about looking at the specific items that are listed in the study session, and is this something that we eventually, is it connected to what we're taking action on? Is it just informational? So I'm just repeating everything that they said, but in my mind, it keeps coming back to, I think we just have differences of what the study session is, and do we clearly define what that is and see what updates or what topics need to fit in there versus what fit into board meetings?
So OGP 3, the board has already defined what a study session is.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's spelled out there for the board.
An opportunity to study topics in depth.
May also be used as an opportunity to meet with selected groups and persons whose insights and opinions will be helpful to the board.
Tag team that one well. Can I talk again? Okay, well, I just to put a finer point. I started with a question, but I'll give my opinion now. I think moving high school day update and also things like that to the business meeting is a better idea than having it in the study session. I think depending on what that update is, on whether it's truly, it's an update for the board or really just a community update, even moving it out of the board meeting entirely and providing a targeted community update could end up being an even better solution, depending on what information is needing to be communicated and to whom. I have more comments. I'm out of questions for now, but I'm going to shift. So go ahead, Dr. Holman.
So I have a very pragmatic request because we have 30 minutes and President Choi, Vice President Guthrie, and I will need to take the feedback we hear tonight, get back together to work to design the next iteration of the work plan. And so there's a comment of please move as many of these updates to the business meeting of the board. And so we'll need kind of is that generally the consensus that the board has? I've also heard that the OE updates in the study session may not be the best placement of those. And if that's accurate, does the board, because there doesn't need to be a presentation for operational expectations. There's no requirement of it. There's a monitoring report that the board receives. It's publicly available. And so the board could just have it on non-consent. You could conduct the discussion as a board. You could, motion, have further discussion, advisement, approve or not approve, hopefully approve. And then there's a summary written. And so there doesn't need to be a presentation. The presentation was really based on the board's feedback. So the three of us will need some really tangible actions from this conversation to go and continue our work related to the work plan.
And can I add one more thing to that? And then Director Stewart.
No, I forgot
one. Yes, and I'm hearing that we want to free up space in the study session, but aside from Director Stewart's request to talk about inclusion in special education, I haven't heard what additional things we would want to plug in. And I think that would be super helpful as we're starting to put together the work plan to know that as well, so that if there's only 2.5 things or whatever that we want to plug in, then we may actually not have a problem here. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I guess I'll do that, but I'm going to address Dr. Holman's question about the OEs and having the conversation. I'm actually, now that I understand the scope and the intended purpose of those, I'm comfortable with having board discussion, a presentation that is on the monitoring of OE 12, OE 13, for example, and then the board questions and answers and sort of the discussion, some level of discussion and question and answers around those in a study session. I think that is like an in-depth, I mean, that fits what, how we've defined study sessions, I think, study topics in depth. And that does actually make sense to me. So I am comfortable with that. I know I was asking a lot of questions around that at the beginning, but I am satisfied. On the topics, a comment, one bullet, I mean, and I think Dr. Holman recognizes at the top, we are, I'm remembering the number of times we talked about levy planning in 2021, and it was more than one. I think it was upwards of four times that it was brought back to the board. I would expect that to be no different, if not more. And so I think when we're thinking about the beginning of this work plan, I would, and I think it doesn't, right now it doesn't come back until much later too, after August 1. I can't find it right away here. Well, let me see. Yeah, so I know it's hard to turn things around in 2 weeks, but I would actually anticipate and hope that we would have much more front-loaded conversation on levy planning than is currently in here. And a lot of what is in the top half of this would have to slide down. And I think that's important and appropriate for the board. And I do think that's going to, there's a lot of holes. I think that's going to go away really fast once we are realistic with the number of meetings we're going to need to talk about bond and levy planning. So what I don't know when I look at this is what is, I have some sense, but I'm not certain. I don't know if the full board is certain, like what is still on the agenda for this year. I know that I remember that the board expressed some interest and took action on having a discussion around enrollment policy development. And so I think that's on the books for this year. At a meeting on the work plan, is that right? I know there's a placeholder right now, so that's another example of something that would take up some space potentially. Biennial. Yeah. Of course. Can I say one more thing? Like I actually have a lot more comments on this work plan, and I know that we want to wrap this up, but I think even I'd be okay having this come back in our next meeting too for more discussion. I think it's really important that we, particularly with the context of the board and some things, and some changes that are coming, I think it's really important that we all be on the same page right now. So I don't want to rush this too much, but I do also want to answer the questions now that people have so that the folks working on this can come back at the next one. I'm done. Thank you, Dr. Holman.
I think additionally, the three of us will also look at the remainder of this year. Associate Superintendent Posthumus commented today, maybe it was last week, that was it the Budget Advisory Committee was, someone was hoping that we could have our levy decision made sooner rather than later. And there's a lot of work to be done. And so we'll need to bring information really starting in the next couple of meetings, just kind of state of things. The governor has not taken action on the full scope of bills. And so while we believe we know what the lay of the land is, that's still not finalized.
To follow up with that remainder of the schedule this year, I do believe also we talked about at the retreat putting in reviewing of a few GCs, and I think that was going to be for this year, and I don't see that also on the schedule. So if that's not there, that would be something up front in this new work plan to add. And I do want to thank the three of you, because I can only imagine the puzzle of putting all of this together. So thank you. And I really, really want to call out January 12th, going back and looking at the work plan and like a review of it. Really, really, really appreciate that. Yeah. So sorry, I know it probably feels like it's all negative right now, but I really do do appreciate the work and the time that went into this. And then as you're moving forward, like just again, looking at that study session, I have it up right now, that it's an opportunity to study topics in depth. So what does that mean? So as you're reflecting on changing this around, like how are we doing that with the topics that are going to be changed or added or left? Can you
One
remind
was
me the-
around having presentation and questions on the OEs during a study session.
Go to Mark first.
I was going to say I'm confused by the question back and forth there. I now recall what I was going to address. My concern about having the study sessions hitting things like the high school enrollment or whatever it might be, it's more difficult for our public, our parents, to get to a study session. I realize we have a video of it online. I have never, to be quite frank, over all the years we've had video, heard a report on how much is actually watched, not only live, but also on reviewed as a result. Oh, somebody's going to find numbers. No. But, I'm concerned about the public not having a chance to really hear it out in an earlier session. They may not have the patience, if you will, to go through 4 hours of video, but they might have the patience to go through 2 hours of video. And they'd probably consider the business meeting to be more important to them. I don't know. The second goes back to Eric's comment about enrollment updates. I see that as something, one, that's very important, but two, I'd see that as an annual, because I think we basically do it almost every year that we look at it and we look at flow and see what flow's got. Anyway, just a thought. Well, yeah, my other topics I mentioned earlier, SPED, critical thinking, and maybe that goes into your security discussion when you're talking online security. But I'm not sure it really does, to be quite frank. To me, online security is more of a techie kind of discussion than it is a discernment of fact from fiction.
Lindsay, did you have your answers?
For the OEs in the study session, was the question around a presentation? Yes or no? Yeah. I mean, I say try it and then see what happens, because it could be, what if that takes 2 hours with the questions, right? Because it will be a presentation and the question part, and then I feel like some of the OEs take quite a bit of time to be able to do that. And depending on what's happening, I don't know, right? So I see that levy recommendation falls after or at the same time of OE 12 and 13. And what is going to be prioritized in that meeting? Is it going to start with OEs? Is it going to start with the levy recommendation? I could see either one of those taking 2 hours. So I say try it and then make a change. As far as topics, I mean, I feel like we provided that input. Again, I think it goes back to that studying topics in depth. Like what? Yep, I know. Yes, good. I think for me, it really is looking at like mission and vision and tying it to those. And if we're or our pillars, equity, inclusion, MTSS, like to me, those are topics that to go deeper into those to better understand what that's looking like and the work around that. I mean, that could pull in with the school safety and security update. Like it could be that like these meetings, the title is equity, right? But maybe these little sub points of interest tie into each of those. But the in-depth, could that be our main, like MTSS, inclusion and equity, and then all these little ones, how do they fit? That's kind of how I see it in my mind. So I'm kind of looking at the bigger picture, but don't know how specific conversations or topics would come from that.
Well, as long as you're asking the question again, it front-loaded the idea of the lack of SPED update. So hopefully that won't get lost since it didn't work. Okay, good. Making sure.
I don't have anything else specific to add. Most of the things that I had are incorporated or touch on this. One thing actually to follow up on Director Yoakum's point that might tie that together is we don't have a strategic plan update in here right now, and I don't know if we should. That'll be my topic.
Okay.
We'll do that this year.
Yeah, we'll do that in June, I believe, or August. We do. We always do, which is why the back half is always blank. Do you have something else?
Of course.
Okay, go ahead. Mark, did you?
I can't remember at the extended study session. We did talk, I agree with Director Hoopman, there was some interest, I think, from the board of taking a look at the some of the GCs. One in particular that comes to mind, because we're doing it right now, is on the development of the work plan. And not just, I think the development, it's actually is going quite well, but I think I think amendments to it and having some better language on how the board agrees to change the work plan and having a discussion around what that process will be, because I could argue all sides of that for what the process should and shouldn't be. But I think sort of having that discussion as a board would be highly valuable. Because again, we could have a very different board in December, and that board may want to change the work plan. And I think having some clarity around what that process should or is and is not would be valuable. And having that sooner than later, I think, would be valuable too. I'm taking the silence as full agreement from the rest of the board.
If you were to prioritize the enrollment discussion versus the discussion you just talked about, which would you prioritize?
Thank you for asking. It's a good question. I would actually prioritize what I just flagged.
And I believe you'd prioritize levy above both of those conversations. And I'm being pragmatic because
levy planning.
Because we have 3 study sessions remaining in the school year.
I know. Yeah, I would.
I agree.
It's hard when there's a lot of work to do. But yes, I would. Yeah.
To a degree, John, I could see the discussion on levy having a lot of enrollment figures anyway. So I don't see it as an either or, to be quite frank. In my, because we're looking at populations and what we're going to build, whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. It'll definitely be grounded in enrollment. The further discussion that Director LaLiberty, I believe, wants to have is how does the board potentially think about enrollment related to your policies?
Yes.
And is there an opportunity to capture that through the monitoring process as well?
Or does it already? I think would be something for the board to consider. Okay. I have more. Is there anything that? Well, I think the meeting ends at 6:45, so at that point.
So, you forgot one topic, John, in your list of priorities, and that was discussing the annual work plan again at the next study session as well.
Yep. And I would prioritize that.
Over leverage planning?
Well, I think we need to, yes.
Okay. Okay. Did you have something else?
Yes.
Okay.
Since we're talking about, and I mean, now, we're starting to see how these holes are filling. So I don't actually know that this will even fit in, but the board has, when we were monitoring results 1, expressed an interest to provide direction to think about how we are monitoring results 1, the indicators, and thinking about having some different options coming back to the board to monitor results 1. And that also, I mean, that was true for results, I believe results 3 as well. I can't remember, but in some of the more recent monitoring, there's been just sort of a few sub-policies where the board is, I think having a meeting come back with all of those at once would be beneficial. I don't know if we need a full meeting for results 1 to unpack the additional indicators the board's asked for, but there's just been a sort of, I think, a cleanup meeting for, in the summaries where we've asked for.
That won't be a study session.
What's that?
That won't be a study session. That'll be a board meeting.
Well,
Because we'll have to take action on new indicators.
maybe, but yes, agreed. It will have to be, yes. It will have, the action will have to happen in a board meeting. But I think the conversation around what those indicators are and for the board to make sure that what's coming back to us is consistent with the direction we provide, I do think that would be better, a better forum would be in the study session.
I was planning this week to have that conversation with John about having that on a board meeting, because we don't have space in study sessions anymore for the rest of the year. Outstanding requests for changes to updates or changes to indicators from this year.
Okay. Okay. Pragmatically, I understand. If we could get that far in advance in writing, that would be helpful for me. Good luck.
Okay. Anything else?
I got more.
Oh my God.
Session in July. Go for it.
No, we are not. No, we are not. Eric.
I noted that we have a December 13 Saturday study session on here. I really appreciated some of Director Yoakum's feedback as coming on board and just feeling like and just reminded me of how hard it is to come on board as a new board member. And so, I don't love onboarding stuff personally, but I do think if we're going to be having new board members, like, I think we want to be thoughtful about making sure there is enough space to provide adequate onboarding and for us to not just onboard, but also for us to think about working together as a team. So let's keep it as just December 13, but I do want to put in the room that there may be a reason and interest in having more than just that as a study session to make sure we're all on the same page and working together before we start growing. I don't know if I got that metaphor. In December, January timeframe. So we should be thoughtful about not over scheduling that time period. Mm-hmm. Anyone else? Do we have time to talk about progress monitoring at all? Okay. Okay. Okay, then I'm not going anywhere. Something. I hope that's just vacation, but okay. something we haven't talked about in this, and I know that's just because it's probably because it's just a draft, is I guess what we call linkages, sort of connections around policy work. Like if for example, that we work on enrollment policy, I could envision some connection work around that we would want to do, and have suggested some in my. Okay, I've lost 2 of them in my survey. So I guess my thought on that. Okay, if we reached a breaking point, we might have. Okay, that's fair. Okay, my thought on linkages is I don't want to just have linkages for the sake of linkages. I think a direct connection to ongoing policy work is really important, and like prioritize policy work. So when we're finalizing this work plan, I agree with Director Yoakum that I think what her point was that like we should identify like the top level priorities, and I think that's important if we're going to be building linkages in, to like think about what are the 1 or 2 things that are really the focus, and then have the linkages around those so we can start planning that out farther in advance.
Was that accomplished in this work plan?
Which part? No, I guess to answer the question, either, no matter what the question was, no. I don't think we've identified the key priorities in this work plan for the board. I know that there's like, I'm aware of the key priorities for the district, but like, yes, sorry.
Sorry, key priorities for the linkages or for the?
Both. Like, when I look at this, I'm not able to identify what the key priorities are for the work, for the policy work of the board. I see linkages on here for OE10. So I suppose I could infer that was, but I'm not certain, and I don't know if everyone's on the same page there.
I remember having this discussion during the retreat, and it was how does this process work, how we fill in these gaps, and it was taking the survey and looking at it and looking at who said what the most, and that goes in. And I also remember we talked about, well, to be able to see the responses might trigger something for me. Like, I hadn't thought about that. So I'm wondering, rather than like just going with what is said tonight, are we able to take this home, look at it and say, hey, after I've reviewed all of this, like if I were to name the big ones out of all of these, like this is what it would be. Because I think there's benefit in hearing and seeing what everybody views as a priority, and how does that tie to what my priorities were, and where do I give, and can see how, yes, that one looks good. But that was a piece I remember from the retreat, that just to be aware of what everyone else is thinking, because it might trigger something in my mind that like I had not thought about that. So I don't know if that helps to be able to provide another round of feedback after we are able to view the results here.
So I think we are going to look at calendars and schedule a follow-up with Dr. Holman, Lisa, and myself to do the second draft using the feedback from tonight. We will go ahead and look at the agenda for the next 3 study sessions and try to figure out where we can fit in what needs to be completed for the rest of this year, hopefully with enough time to have another discussion on the work plan and progress monitoring, because we didn't get to it at this study session. I will let the rest of the board know when that meeting is scheduled for, so that if you have anything else you wanted to add, you can connect with one of us to make sure that that's included. Other than that, thank you everyone for the discussion. Since there are no other agenda items this evening, the May 5th, 2025 study session is now adjourned at 6:43. Thank you.